Well, hello and welcome back. So I am so excited for today's guest. I have Kellyn Legath on the show. Hello, Kellyn.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. So I have had the honor and privilege of coaching with Kellyn back and forth. We've kind of coached each other, and I can tell you that she is both compassionate and insightful. And I just love her. So yeah, she and I certified together. And so we go way back to the baby days of coaching, right?
Yeah, it feels like we've been on this journey together for like 10 years, although it's been like two.
Yeah. So it's just been super fun to kind of just see the evolution of both of our practices and personal development. And it's just fun to have other people along for the ride. So I love it. It's kind of just fun to have a friend to chat with and workshop different things with. And so I am excited to have her on and share her with the rest of you. So Kellyn is a coach that she works with helping humans to overcome their anxious thoughts and build self-worth so they can live life with more clarity and purpose. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to explore some ideas with her today. So today we're going to kind of be talking about the correlation between anxiety and people pleasing. And I'm kind of excited about this. So, yeah, let's hear it, Kellyn. What is the
I'm,
correlation between anxiety and people pleasing?
yeah, it's so great, especially, to talk to you because the people that you've been serving are people pleasers. And so much of the types of people that I've been working with are anxious. And there's a lot of crossover. I think as we started our journey, we both were like, I think we sort of have a lot of the same people that we're
Yep.
talking to. And it's because of this correlation that, you know, essentially what happens is people attempt to please others because they feel anxious about upsetting them or fitting in. It's very much like a social anxiety that comes up. Um, but in general, I think the best way to explain it is that like people pleasing is an anxiety response, right? Is that what you've been seeing as you've been coaching with people that they're responding to things and
Yeah. And I love that you kind of because it's makes it easier when you put the words around it, right? So it is interesting to think about people pleasing through that lens of it being an anxiety response. Because I think you're spot on that so often people are feeling anxious and because they feel like they have to do these things for other people, they must make everybody else happy. And yeah, it's kind of a wild ride, right? But I don't think that people oftentimes make that correlation, that there is a correlation between the two.
right, right. And think about your mind. You're like, oh my gosh, I want this person to be happy with me, right?
Mhm.
And right away that thought just creates anxiety within you. Oh my gosh, like I want this to happen, right? It's very much like you want to control the outcome, right?
Yeah,
And then think about what you do in response to that. You're like,
right.
oh, I'm just going to invite them because I know that they want to come, or I'm just going to
Mhm.
tell them this thing that I know will make them happy. And it's very well meaning, right?
Yeah.
Um, but then what's the result that's creating?
Yeah. So
Well,
what is the result that it's creating? What happens? Because it sounds like such a good thing, right? To be like, "Hey, I'm gonna invite them to this thing. They're gonna be so happy." But then what does it create when it's coming through that lens?
Yeah. Many things, I think. I think the biggest thing is you end up abandoning yourself in
Yeah.
so many ways.
Mm.
I say that from my own experience. I was so other focused for my entire life.
Mhm.
And still until I started to get these tools that you and I both teach in coaching. And
Mhm.
it was just so easy. And it was like such a beautiful thing. I was like, oh, this is so great. I just, want to make these other people happy and I'm doing it. And then it was like, well, what about me? I sort of left myself in the dust in doing that.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think the other result that I always see is that it just pulls you away from your true authenticity. Like,
Mm.
who are you at your core? It's like, how can you even think or identify who you are at your
Mhm.
core? You're constantly thinking of others. And then it's
Yeah.
hard to build that back. Or I mean, I hate to use the term hard sometimes because it
Mhm.
it has this like impossible undertone, but
Yeah.
um I think building that takes time and you have to really look at so many things and it's like starting from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I kind of like how you explained that because to me, it almost sounded like there's a little bit of the self-deception in there, right? Because I know that for me, like when I'm going out and making people happy, I initially feel so good about it. And I don't even realize until after the fact that I was going into it trying to make them happy in an effort to fulfill something in me. Right. So maybe it's in the back of our mind, we're hoping for the reciprocation or we're hoping that they're going to like praise us or It's funny because we're doing it to make somebody else happy, but ultimately it's that self-deception that, "Well, no, I'm doing it to make other people happy," but really it's because we're seeking a feeling. Like,
Totally.
we're lacking something and we're trying to get it fulfilled, but we don't know how to fulfill it. So we
Right.
try to create it in other people, hoping it will be mirrored back, but it's kind of a strange thing of not actually recognizing, like, what's going on for us, and it's interesting because in the most recent episodes here on the podcast, we've been talking a lot about identifying those needs. And I think that once you're able to identify those needs, you can kind of let go a little bit of that anxiety and recognize, okay, well, this can come from within, but it's bringing it into your conscious awareness first and like acknowledging the self deception that no, it's up
Totally.
to me to fulfill that for myself.
Oh, 100%. I think the ownership of, like, what you're creating is huge, right?
Hmm.
Also, I think a big thing is tuning into, like, what's your intention? It's like what we're
Yeah.
both talking about. Like, it feels so great and it feels so loving when you're like,
Hmm.
sure, you're just like, sure, you can come with me even though you don't want them to come with you, or I'll help you even though you don't want to help. Like, it feels so
Yeah.
great. And at the end of the day, when you really dial it back and you're in a place to take that ownership, you're
Hmm.
like, I'm being dishonest,
Hmm.
being dishonest with myself. And I think people pleasers
Hmm.
are like, "Oh my gosh, I don't identify with being a liar, a dishonest person."
Yeah.
That, like, shook things up. I was like, "Whoa, I'm lying to people around me and I'm lying to myself, and now this is way
Yeah.
worse. This is terrible," right?
Yeah, because it's not only dishonest, but it's also kind of manipulative because you're expecting them to fulfill something for you. And that does kind of flip it on its head, right? Because it's like, no, but the point was to make everybody happy.
Right, right, and now you're in that spiral again. It is like a vicious cycle, right? You're in that
Yeah.
spiral again because now you're like, "No, I'm anxious, not only about the way I acted or the thing I said, but I'm
Hmm.
anxious about who I am." And
Yeah.
that brings up a lot of shame and regret and disappointment and, you know, all those types of emotions, and it's just like, "Oh my gosh, now what do I
Yeah.
do? I'm in this spiral."
Yeah. Well, you've already said a few of these things, but I'm wondering if you can kind of condense it down a little bit. Like, how does believing that we're responsible for other people's emotions, how does that impact us, like mentally and emotionally?
Yeah. Emotionally, I feel like you're, at least for me and, for a lot of the people I coach, you're always on guard. You're always in
Mhm.
panic mode. I like, I think there's, especially in the world of anxiety, people are talking a lot about nervous system regulation, kind of
Mhm.
tuning into yourself. And it's this, like, we're always in fight or flight,
Yeah.
right? And it's not a healthy place to be, mentally or physically, right?
Yeah.
Mentally or emotionally. And I think the other places, you're always like, go, 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 go. It's so easy to, like, push the emotions away. I
Mhm.
think that emotional stuffing is a huge thing that happens with people because they're like, hate this feeling. It feels terrible. Let me numb with
Yeah.
social media. Let me numb by calling a friend and complaining to her, or gossiping or doing all these things.
Mhm.
Um, let me avoid, right? Shutting
Yeah.
shutting people out and avoiding. So, that emotional stuffing is huge, right? And think about
Yeah.
how that affects you. You're carrying all that emotion.
Mhm.
We talk about how, I know you've talked about it on your podcast and on your Instagram, about how to process emotions.
Yeah.
If you're not processing them, they're just in you. They're just, like, stuck there, and you're carrying, I always think of it like a backpack. You're just, like, carrying all these emotions, unprocessed emotions, and the backpack gets really heavy. And,
Yeah.
that becomes exhausting. It becomes exhausting to live that way.
Yeah. Boy, the way you worded that, it was real almost giving me, like, emotional flashbacks, kind of remembering who I was before coaching. I mean, honestly, one of the most beneficial things that I've personally experienced through coaching is learning how to self-regulate those emotions. Because I think a lot of that anxiety comes from we are trying to control other people's emotional reactions, but we can't control the other people, right? So then we're even more anxious because, "No, but you're supposed to do things in the way I want you to do them," and I remember personal story, but yeah, so I remember one day when I was in conversation with somebody and it wasn't going how I thought it should have been going, right? I couldn't control the other person. And I found myself, like you said, in that fight or flight response where I was like, no, but it was supposed to happen this way and kind of panicking and almost hyperventilating. And I was like, wow, I am so dysregulated. What is happening for me? But I had been so disassociated from my own emotions and so in that realm of self-deception as to what was it that I was actually wanting to create, because it wasn't what I was actually creating, right? So
Right.
instead I'd like in an effort to essentially create love and acceptance and being seen and heard and validated and understood and all those amazing things, but the way that I was going about it, my subconscious kind of took over where it's like, "Oh,
Totally.
we're gonna get to that place in this roundabout way." It's like,
Right.
"Whoa." But then we try to manage other people's emotions, but really, I think part of it is, and this might be a leap, you tell me what you think, but I kind of wonder if people really struggle to self-regulate with their own emotions, if they maybe even try harder to manage other people's emotions, because it seems more doable when it's something outside of them, and if they really struggle with their own.
Totally.
But what do you think?
When you're in that situation, like you're so focused outward, right?
Mhm.
So the second that you have to focus inward, that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's so, so uncomfortable. I was the queen of avoiding my emotions and I still am. It's still a constant practice that I have to be like,
Mhm.
oh, you're intellectualizing this. You have to actually feel what's going on,
Huh.
and feel your emotions because even in those like fight or flight moments with
Mhm.
exactly what you were describing, I'd feel like I've had a hard time. And then I'd get a text from a friend and they'd be like, do you have time to talk? I'm really going through it. I'd be like, yep, absolutely. Like, great. Let me focus on you.
Ah.
Let me avoid me and focus on you. That's great. Like, I would love to extend myself to you as long as it meant I don't have to deal with what's going on with me.
Yeah, well, and also kind of made that a feminine virtue almost. I think especially as women, we're taught that. No, you need to go take care of everybody else. We're supposed to be nurturing, we're supposed to be caregiving, we're
Uh,
supposed to be holding space for everybody else. And then when we're left with our own emotions, it's like, I don't know what to do. Like,
Right.
I know how to help other people. I know how to make them feel better. I don't know what I need.
Right, right, and that starts the whole path of self-discovery, right? That goes back to what we were saying before, it's like it's sort of like starting from the beginning. When you
Mhm.
finally break through and break free from it, you're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, now what are my values? What do I wanna do?"
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, actually, speaking of personal story, I remember coaching through Monday Hour 1
Mhm.
coach that I worked through, and we were
Mhm.
talking about time management. And she's like, okay, first put in all the things that you like want to do with your week. And I was like, what? Like, she was like, put in the fun stuff. And I was like, I could not put in fun things.
Yeah.
She was like, what do you mean? She was sweet, but she was like, what do you mean? And I was at a point where I was like, I have to do work and I have to do laundry. And it was very regimented things and
Yeah.
focusing on other things I needed to do. But when she said, put in the things you want to do, I'm like, I guess I like to go hiking sometimes. And like,
Mhm.
but I was like, how do I do this? How do I
Yeah.
kind of show up for myself and do the things that I want to do? And that was such an aha moment for me too, to be like, whoa, I get to choose. I get to choose when I want to have like the fun things I want to do and
Yeah.
not just kind of follow everyone else's lead in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I love that of actually prioritizing what you would like to do.
Right.
'Cause yeah, because I know it's so easy to fall into the trap of, well, I'll go see the movie that they wanna see. I'll go out to eat where they want to go out to eat. I'll go do the things that they want to do. But
Right.
we never even make a request for something that we might like. And I know it's taken me some practice to be like, this is the thing I want to go do. And if you'd like to join me, you're more than welcome. And if you don't, that's okay. But I'm
Right.
gonna prioritize that this is something that I want to do, and I'm going to treat it as something that I want to do.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. And I think having that mindset of being like, this is something I'm going to do and I'm honoring myself by doing it. Right.
Mhm.
In
Mhm.
doing that practice, I think you start to build that muscle of worth, right? Self
Yeah.
worth. And you're like, I deserve to do the things that I want to do. And I think that's so important. I also think jumping to sort of the other side of it as far as people pleasing goes, like I'm gonna use hiking as an example because I
Mhm.
do it often, and I just think being in nature is so healing. So, I think this is just a random example, but say you wanna go on a hike
Mhm.
and you're like, "I wanna be by myself. I just wanna go at my own pace. I just wanna, go to this very specific hike." And you tell a friend, "Oh, Saturday I'm going hiking." And they're like, "Oh, I wanna come. Can I come with you?" And I think your gut instinct is to be like, "I don't want you to come." But then what does your mouth say?
Yeah.
You should really come, right? And you have this gut instinct or this inner knowing, right?
Mhm.
I don't want them to come. And it's not because you're mad at them or annoyed at them or anything. It's just like
Mm.
you want to have this alone time. But you're like, it's gonna upset them, right?
Yeah.
And this is where the anxiety comes in a little bit. If I don't if I have to have this like weird confrontation or if I have to explain myself, that's a terrible feeling. So let me just say
Mhm.
yes and give them what they want
Yeah.
instead of saying, actually, I really want to do this alone. I would love to
Yeah.
go hiking with you, next week. And the really, really important thing I think to remember about that is what happens then when you invite them and say, yeah, sure, you can come. It's no big deal. And then you start the hike 2 hours later than you want to, or you don't go as far as you want to because that's
Mhm.
what the friend wants to do. What happens then is you have resentment,
Yeah.
right? You're creating all this resentment between you and that other person. And you're like, "Ugh, I hate when Sarah comes with me, and then there's a lot of um, unspoken anger between,
Yeah.
right?
And it's so interesting to think about because first of all, I think, yeah, sometimes it is the compassionate thing to do to tell them no.
Yeah.
And also how interesting too that we oftentimes say yes in an effort to avoid discomfort. But then in that example, but then you're like out in the woods for hours feeling really uncomfortable. And so
Right.
like choosing that, okay, either way I'm going to be a little uncomfortable. I can
Totally.
choose the short-term discomfort or the long-term discomfort, but
Right.
I get to choose, and it's a bit more empowering when you recognize, okay, it is a choice. I'm not avoiding discomfort. That's another self-deception,
Right.
right? That we can avoid discomfort. And how many times do we say yes, trying to avoid that? So that
Right.
was that was a great example.
Yeah. And I think too, like that going back to that like inner knowing,
Mhm.
I feel like in situations when I've been like this, I'm already uncomfortable
Yes.
saying yes,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm like, they're not uncomfortable, but I'm taking ownership of all the discomfort. I'm uncomfortable knowing that I'm not being honest. Like my authenticity alarm was going off, being like,
Yeah.
you're not being truthful to yourself. And I'm like, "Ugh, I said yes. I should have. I really don't want them to come." And then I'm putting on this fake smile. And again,
Yeah.
I'm like, now I'm being this fake person. And now, this isn't how I want to show up in the world.
Yeah, and Kellen, I just have to repeat what you just said because that was such a huge statement where you said, "Now we're taking ownership of all of the discomfort." Like, let's just sit with that for a minute, right?
Mhm.
Because we're trying to save someone else from being uncomfortable. But what's the worst thing that's gonna happen? Somebody's gonna be uncomfortable. Okay, well, we just volunteered as tribute, right? Like,
Right. Right.
and to just
Yeah.
be okay with learning that, you know what, they're probably gonna be a little disappointed that they didn't get to go on this hike. We can go on a different hike together sometime.
Right.
But how interesting what we tried to create and how much that actually self-sabotages. But wow, that was powerful for me. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I just chose to take on all of the discomfort.
Right.
Wow.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, think of so many situations where that happens.
Mhm.
We're like, you know what? I don't want to be uncomfortable, and then we're dealing with the discomfort and not even acknowledging it. Right? Most of us aren't even tuned into our emotions enough to be like, oh, I'm uncomfortable. We're just like, oh, I feel terrible.
Yeah. Well, and then it's so interesting too to think about how it's actually doing a disservice not only to ourselves because now we're taking on all the discomfort, but we're doing them a disservice as well because they're never learning how to navigate being turned down or having
Right.
disappointment. We are coddling so then they never develop that muscle of
Right.
learning how to navigate that negative emotion. It's so
Totally.
interesting. It really doesn't benefit either party.
Right. Right. And what's the saying? You teach people how to treat you. Right.
Yeah.
And I think just as human, whether you're a highly sensitive person, an anxious person, whatever, I do think as human, we are in tune to each other. So
Mhm.
in those situations, if you're the person that's always saying, yes, 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 you can come, yes, I'll do that thing. And then suddenly you hit the brakes
Mhm.
and you're like, actually, I want to go alone. The other person's like, something's wrong. Something's wrong with Kellyn.
Yes.
Something wrong with MaryAnn. We must be fighting. Or, because we're all storytellers, we're all making up these stories in our
Yeah.
mind to keep us safe. I think, especially if you look at it from a social stance, this is really, like I said at the beginning, this is like a type of social anxiety, right?
Yeah.
And what do we know about our primal brain is
Mhm.
that back when we were cavemen and cavewomen,
Mhm.
being kicked out of the tribe meant death.
Yeah.
We are wired for connection in that way. We
Yeah.
want to be around people, and it's our instinct to be like, "Oh gosh, if I don't make this relationship perfect, if I don't please this person, they're gonna reject me."
Yeah.
And that rejection is so scary. So just for anyone who's dealing with it, like just, don't gaslight your own emotions and say, "Oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way or I shouldn't be doing this." It's a practice and it's an
Mhm.
unlearning.
Yeah. Yeah, it does take practice, and like you said, it's not only practicing, like, how to be okay with everybody having their own feelings, but also practicing when people do experience that whiplash, right? Where they're like, "No, but you've always done exactly what I wanted to do. Like, we were supposed to be the same, and now you're telling me you're different. You're differentiating yourself, and I don't know what to do." And it's interesting, I don't know what your experience has been, but I know from my personal experience of having to learn how to navigate that and having to learn to give either, a wholehearted yes, wait until I could give a wholehearted yes before committing to something. And people did experience that whiplash. And it was interesting to, first of all, notice how I felt when somebody was having a reaction. But then also the other practice that's kind of like the subcategory was like just practicing being like, okay, I understand and I can have compassion towards that. That, yeah, of course they're going to be experiencing whiplash, but then also like leaning into that discomfort and just being like, no, like, we're good. I promise you, we're good. Like, the
Yeah.
reassuring of other people along the journey was really interesting, and that one kind of surprised me too, how much I had to reassure other people when I was starting to find myself was pretty fascinating.
Uh, Totally, right? And, I think amazing that you have that capacity. I think most people, even that brings up anxiety, having that
Yeah.
conversation, being honest about, think of how many conversations bring up anxiety. Oh gosh,
Yeah.
if I do this, they're going to judge me or whatever. But being in a place where you're like, you know what, I'm going to be like, we're good. You don't need to worry.
Mhm.
That's such a powerful place to be in. I think it took me some time to get there in the beginning. I was sort of
Yeah.
like, gosh, um, I want to tell them, but then I don't want them to think that I'm a loser or
Mhm.
that I'm whatever the story is that we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, so what practical tips do you have that
yeah.
people could apply today? Because sometimes it's really hard to just break free of that. So what tips do you have to help people to make it through that transition?
Yeah. I think the first thing is building the awareness. I think
Mhm.
any kind of mindfulness practice is so important. It was so important for me to understand what the stories were that I was telling myself
Yeah.
exactly to, the conversation we just had. What are the stories that I'm telling myself when I tell somebody no? It's,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, they're going to hate me. Oh my gosh, they think I'm selfish. Whatever it is, you have to build that understanding of what's going on in your brain to really break through and be able to do something with the information, right?
Mhm.
So I think building awareness, whether it's journaling, I suggest to all my clients journaling. It's part of the 12-week program that we go to. Like you have to journal every day for 5 minutes just to get all your thoughts out and to kind of take a look at what's going on in there. So that is the first thing. The second thing I would say is learning to not only process your emotions, but identify your emotions.
Mm.
The biggest change in my life, as far as anxiety goes, happened when I started to tune into my body and go, okay, anxiety feels like this. I feel it in my throat, my heart's beating a little bit. Um, and I and then so actually this came up when I was dating somebody a
Mhm.
few probably over a year or two now. And
Mhm.
I was bucketing everything as anxiety. I was like, I'm so anxious. I'm anxious about this. I'm anxious about this. I'm anxious about this. And then when I started to understand and kind of make a map of my emotions,
Mhm.
I was like, oh, I'm using anxiety as a scapegoat. This
Wow.
isn't anxiety. This is disappointment, or
Hmm.
this is fear, or this is sadness. I was totally misdiagnosing my own emotional well being.
Hmm.
And once I started to really tune into myself,
Mhm.
it changed my life completely. I sort of stopped identifying so much as anxious, and
Yeah.
just started identifying as a person that has emotions.
Oh, I love that so much.
Right,
And
and
that is so powerful, right? Because if you can separate out, okay, because you treat anxiety versus sadness so different. Like, it's a
Totally.
totally it's giving us completely different information, but if we're mislabeling it, we're giving ourselves false information around what the need is.
Totally. I mean, I can't even express enough how much that changed my life. I mean, imagine
Yeah.
if you go to the doctor for 33 years and they're like, "Oh, you have a heart problem. You have a heart problem." And then one time you go and they're like, "Actually, that's a lung issue you
Yeah.
have." You'd be like, "What? What do you mean? You've been telling me wrong information the whole time." That's sort of how I felt. I was like, I've been telling myself I'm anxious, I'm anxious, I'm anxious. And
Yeah.
that's because I didn't have the tools. And you're absolutely right. The way that I process sadness is very different than how I would process anxiety.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm anxious in this relationship. And it's just like, actually, I'm disappointed because they're not meeting my need, which of
Mhm.
course I would never know as a past people pleaser,
Yeah. And I
because
loved your
people pleasers don't have needs, right?
yeah, that's right. People pleasers don't have needs. That's hilarious. We love to think so. When I loved your example too of like a misdiagnosis, like if you went to the doctors, because it's also similar where it's like, okay, could you use the example of I have a heart problem? But maybe we're over labeling where it's like, do you have a heart problem or do you occasionally experience heartburn? Like, how are you going to approach this? Right? Like being more specific as to what it is, because we do overgeneralize
Totally.
and that adds so much more weight to us, right? Because if I'm going through life thinking I have a heart problem, think about all the things I would be limiting. I'm not going to be going on those hikes. I'm not going to be going on high adventures. I'm going to be doing everything to, oh, I can't do that. I need to watch my heart. When really, if the problem is just heartburn and I can pop a tum,
Right, right. It's not
yeah,
so scary, right?
yeah,
It's not like a heart problem is so severe. I love that. I love that you brought that up. I think that's so true when you're like, wait a second, let's take a step back and look at
mhm,
what this really is. I think in our society too, especially with how quickly the internet moves,
mhm,
things catch on. And you know, we want mental health to be talked about and understood. And anxiety is one of those things that people caught on to and then
mhm,
made a joke of in a lot of ways. And it's
mm,
just like, oh my God, I'm so anxious, whatever. But then it sort of becomes part of your identity. It makes people laugh. And you grab onto it. That's what I
mhm,
did. I certainly did that. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm so anxious. Yep, I'm
mm,
an anxious person. I'm anxious. It's like, no, I'm not anxious.
mm.
I've had an anxious thought.
Yeah,
I was making it my whole identity, right?
right, right, acknowledging that, okay, I'm a human, like you said earlier, I'm a human who experiences emotion.
Right.
That doesn't mean I am anxiety. It doesn't
Right.
mean I am depression. It doesn't mean I am these things. Like, that's a part of my current human experience, but that's not all of me. That's
Totally.
oversimplified me, right?
Totally. Right. Yeah. Like, let's just give the Spark Notes version of who I am. And
Yeah.
that being a whole chapter. I think the one last thing that I'll add to kind of tools to navigate
Mhm,
anxiety and people pleasing is really practicing being honest, being vulnerable in a really safe space. I feel so lucky that I have a community of people that I can be honest with and say, like,
mhm,
hey, I'm feeling really weird right now about this. I don't want to do this thing. And I
mhm,
want to be there for you, but I just can't right now. And then having those relationships where they're so loving and caring and they're like, of course, thank you for telling me,
mhm,
thanks for letting me know. Because there are, of course, with people pleasers, they say that people pleasers start as parent pleasers. So especially when it's in like a family environment, the volume is turned up. It can be so much more stressful. But if you can
mhm,
find those small pockets, whether it's with a coach or with a close friend or a teacher, whatever it is, where you
mhm.
can practice being honest and get that beautiful response back that's like, thank you for telling me. I would never want you to do anything you don't want to do. And then you're like, really?
Yeah,
Really? But that's very healing. It's very healing. It retrains your nervous system to be like, it's okay. It's okay to set this boundary. It's okay to be honest. It's okay to put my needs first.
yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Yes, retraining the nervous system. I love that because yeah, because when you are in that constant fight or flight mode, and then as you talked about in your first tip, about building that awareness around what's my story when somebody tells me no, can be so eye opening because really, when you really think about it, and when as you talked about your third tip, practicing being honest and vulnerable in a safe space, It is uncomfortable when you're trying to test those relationships to see if it's a safe space. But ultimately, if somebody's always telling you no and you never get your own cup filled, do you really want to invest in that relationship? And it can be scary because we don't want to admit that we've been investing into a relationship that isn't giving us a balanced return. But also, that's the only way that you can figure that out sometimes is okay, well, now I have more information about how they're going to show up, how I've been showing up. I've tested it. I've been honest and vulnerable, and I can see that this is an unsafe space and make those changes. Or to see, oh, look, now I have I know two people now that can be that safe space for me, and then slowly growing from there.
Right. Right. And knowing that it's okay. Like you're
Mm.
gonna be okay. And um yeah, I think that's so important.
I'm just going to review your tips. So, build awareness around our stories when somebody tells us no, and identify or learning to identify and process emotions, separating them out, not oversimplifying, right? Because so
Yeah.
often we want to say sad, mad, glad, but there are hundreds of different emotions.
Sad. Oh, I love that. Sad, mad, glad. It's just like, here are the basics.
Yeah. It's like, I'm sad. It's like, are you sad or are you feeling lonely? Or are you feeling left
Right.
out? Or are you feeling,
Right. Let's take it a step further. Totally. I love
yeah.
that.
Yeah. And then practicing being honest and vulnerable to find those safe spaces. I love that. So just one last question for you here. So how does when we're taking on these other people's emotions, like I just kind of want to drive home the point, like how is that self-limiting? How does that prevent people from achieving their dreams? I know you work with, all of
Yeah.
the dreamers. So how
Yes.
does that limit them?
Totally. I think it's a little bit what I touched on earlier
Mhm.
that, when you're so focused on everyone else, it's really easy to abandon yourself and
Mm,
your own and not only abandon yourself, but even identify what your own needs and desires are, right?
mm,
Because you've been led by other people. You kind of play the role of follower. And that doesn't mean that you don't have ideas or things that you want to do. It's just that you mold into this perfect person that just shows up for people and does all these things. And then it's like, okay, but what do you want to do? So, you know, I often say like you can't daydream when you're crawling through the mud. And I think people pleasing a lot of times feels like crawling through the mud to
mm,
kind of get back to yourself, right? To get back to your true self and your true desires and who you want to be. So I think that's the biggest thing is understanding that you are so worthy of the things that you want and the things that you desire. And
mm.
so is everybody else, but it's also not your responsibility to create that experience for them. It's your responsibility to create it for yourself.
That was beautiful. Yeah, that we can't daydream while crawling through the mud, and that sometimes we're so worried about being abandoned that we self-abandon. That
Well,
powerful. Yeah.
yeah, it's the cycle, right? So much of our conversation, I feel like, goes back to you get stuck in this washing machine. You get
Yeah.
stuck in the cycle of not wanting to be rude to someone and then you're being rude to yourself, not wanting someone to feel neglected and then neglecting yourself. And,
Mhm.
uh, it really is about clearing that out so you can honor yourself.
Hmm. That's beautiful. All right, so I have a few rapid fire questions for you.
Ooh,
Ready?
okay, we're doing it.
So we're at the end of summer. What's your favorite summer activity?
Ooh, hiking for sure.
Yeah.
Run hiking a lot. Also, I'm in Los Angeles, so I'm close to the beach and doing just a beach plunge on a very hot day. There's still a few hot days left. I just like get that high of running into the ocean and it feels like childlike. So that's really fun.
Yeah.
I love
Oh, that is amazing. And I saw a picture of you on Instagram climbing a tree. Are you a tree climber
it.
too?
Yes, that's one of my favorite hikes. It was actually from a few years ago, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think summer brings out that beautiful like childlike energy. It like
Yeah.
you the chance to kind of like dance in the rain and play in the sand and climb trees. And I try to I'm a summer girl through and
Yeah.
through. So I try to hold on to that stuff as long as I can.
That's awesome. I love
Yeah.
it.
What about you?
Oh, totally. I love all of those same things. Yeah,
Yeah.
my kids were poking fun. We had a huge rainstorm and we're out shopping and they're like, I don't want to go out to the car. I want to wait for it to pass. I'm like, I'll pick you up. I'm like running out through the rain to get to the car. I was completely drenched. And they told me when they got in the car, they're like, you look like a little kid out there. I'm like, yeah, that was fun.
You're very
Why not jump in the puddles?
best. I love that.
So what is your current favorite form of self-care?
Journaling for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely journaling. And it took me a really long time. I won't ramble on too much, but it took me a really long time to really build that journaling habit.
Yeah.
And it's the first thing I do in the morning. It's the thing that I do when I'm feeling scrunchy and I'm just like, oh, what do I do with all these emotions? It's like another limb to me now. So
Yeah.
definitely journaling.
I love that, and I highly recommend for everything that we've already talked about, like, that can be such a great way to identify what your story is, to just write it out and try to look at it objectively. Because sometimes it's not until we write it out and we hear our really sad sob story about how our need wasn't met, it's not until we see it in black and white that we're able to recognize, "Oh, this is how I actually wanna show up." So journaling, using that as a source of information, I love that. Alright, and last question, what is one thing that you really want people to take away from this conversation?
Oh, so much goodness. I think the biggest thing is that like your needs matter. You
Yeah,
know, putting yourself first is not only is it not it is the most beautiful thing you can do, but it's so important to your quality of life.
yeah.
That's the biggest thing. Is that I know it's a practice. I know it can be hard to undo, those things that you've probably been doing since childhood, people pleasing and um but your needs, they matter. And the people that are meant to be in your life and are worth having in your life will respect that honesty and that true you.
I love it, beautiful. So where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah. So my website is daydreamercoaching.com. And you can also find me on Instagram at daydreamercoaching.
Awesome, and I will put all of her contact information in the show notes, so if you wanna reach out to Kellyn, she's fantastic, and this was so much fun, like, I love collaborating with you, we
Yeah,
might have to do this again.
I know, please. We could talk for days, I feel like.
I know,
So
it just feels like a class reunion.
I love it. This was amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored. Your podcast is amazing, and I love seeing the work you do. I'm inspired by you every day. Every day I see something new, and I'm like, wow, she's killing it. It's amazing. So I'm
Aw, well,
so
thank you
excited.
so much, I think the same of you, so this has been a lot of fun. Alright, so everybody, your needs are valid, so yeah, focus on just addressing your own needs, acknowledge that it's okay, right, to somebody's gonna be feeling a little uncomfortable e either way, but you're only responsible for you, so, yeah, good luck this week, you guys. Alright, we'll talk to you soon. Bye now.